This is Dr. Craig Seal, and this is a continuing series of lectures on organizational behavior. This particular lecture will focus on the issue of organizational change, primarily on the issue of culture and climate and values, and then there will be a second video continuing the theme of organizational change, but in that video the focus will be more on resistance to change and force field analysis, or a model whereby you can overcome potential resistance as it comes up in organizations. So for today, what we're going to focus on is culture, climate, and values. And so these are the three areas that we'll focus on for today's video lecture. When we start off, we talk about this concept of organizational culture. What is organizational culture? It's kind of like the personality of an organization. If you remember back to personality, things like extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, all of those are different ways that individuals tend to react, pattern reactions to their environment. Organizations are similar, and they have a culture and a cultured way of reacting to different environmental conditions. And culture is this concept of what are the actual artifacts or symbols that different organizations have. Things like uniforms, dress codes, how does the building look, where is the building, slogans. All of those are artifacts of the culture that you can see that are visible. In addition, cultures will have a series of behaviors. How do people act? What do they do? What's standard? Is it a high customer service culture? Is it a low customer service culture? Is it focused more on production or more on people? In addition, there's values. This underlines behaviors and underlines the different artifacts, meaning what is it that's actually important to members of the organization as a group? Is education important? Is money important? Is happiness important? Where's the focus when you collectively bring people together? And finally, there's some underlying assumptions that people have in organizations that are often shared by members and that allows to feed through this concept of then values, behaviors, and symbols. And so what we'll start off with in terms of an organizational culture is to think about some of the different cultural characteristics that organizations have. Much like personality factors, 5 factors in personality, there's several factors or cultural characteristics that help to define a particular culture as it separates itself from one to another. For example, innovation. Is the culture accepting of risk-taking, or are they more cautious? Another one is attention to detail. How much focus on process and procedures and the rules and whether or not you're following those. Another one is outcome orientation. Does the organization care more about things like sales or profit or return on investment versus people orientation? Is the focus more on the issue of, say, relationships or job satisfaction or work-life balance? Another opportunity is aggressiveness. Does the culture have one in which people should go for it, and those who do go for it are rewarded? Or is it more in terms of stability, meaning the culture likes to stay the same? It doesn't want to change very often and reacts negatively potentially to change. So these different characteristics, innovation, attention to detail, outcome orientation, people orientation, team, aggressiveness, and stability, these 7 factors help to define one culture from another. For example, if you are on a particular sports team, you may find that your team has particular kinds of cultural characteristics which may be different than, say, another team, or at home with your family, versus at work, versus at school. Similarly to culture is this concept of climate. So culture is the personality of the organization. Climate's the attitude of the organization. It's how the members feel about what happens within the organization overall. And it's these shared perceptions about the organization itself and the work environment. And these shared perceptions about work, these attitudes about work, also can shape how organizations are potentially perceived. A couple of ways to look at climate is to think of it in terms of production versus people. And on the production side, is the culture generally open or closed? Meaning, when people come to work, or a part of the organization, part of the family, or part of the team, is there a focus on getting goals accomplished? And in that regard, is there energy in the system? That's an open culture. When people come to work, they're charged up, they're able to do things, that's more indicative of an open, production-oriented kind of climate. Versus closed, where people come to work, but really they're not on board with the same goals. There's not a lot of energy. People are apathetic. In fact, they may even be feeling drained when they come into the organization itself. And so one type of climate, this idea of production, which can be broken into open or closed. Another characteristic of climate that you can look at is the people themselves. Is it healthy or sick? Meaning, do people actually get along? That would be a healthy environment. It's harmonious. Goals are shared or overlapping. People feel like not only is the organization getting what it needs, but people are getting what they need as well. That would be indicative of a healthy, people-oriented climate. Versus some organizations are, for lack of a better word, sick. They're destructive. They're vulnerable. There's a lot of politics that go on. The goals that are happening or followed by the organization are often personal or political, and so people feel like they have to be on guard. The organization is going to be vulnerable, again, either to internal or external sources. So you have these two broad climate characteristics, production versus people, and within those, production can be open and closed, people can be healthy or sick. And so we have the culture, which is sort of the personality of the organization, and we have the climate, which is basically the attitude or shared attitude of the organization. Along those lines, the third piece is the values. What is it people actually feel is important? And how important are those things to the different members of the group? If you think about values, you can think about this option of, is it more important the journey or is it the end? When you take a trip, does it matter more how you get there or does it matter that you got there at all? Think about sports, that old adage in terms of fair play or winning. Is it better to win or lose or is it better to play fair? And some people are more focused on fair play or process, and so their values tend to be more process-oriented. Others are more about winning and losing, end states, terminal values. And so different organizations, different individuals, different groups will have values, and the values are what people actually think is important. And those important kinds of values generally are broken down into the concept of whether it's a process value, things like fair play, or whether it's an end state or terminal value, things like winning and losing. Now, what does that have to do with management? Well, part of management can be managing values. And in fact, one of the newer models specifically addresses how do you manage organizations, and you do so by managing actual values. That is, what's important to the organization? What's important to the founders? What's important to the different stakeholders in the organization? What is it that they want to be? Where do they want to go? And so instead of management in a sense of trying to have a lot of rules or process or procedures or discipline, you're really trying to get people to manage themselves by buying into a set of core values. And those core values shape not only the behaviors of different members, but also help to serve in terms of guideposts about where you're going and how you're going to get there. Three major types of these kinds of values that organizations have are either economic, ethical, or emotional. And so some organizations are going to value more the economic or pragmatic. This is the sense of production. How do we measure performance? What's performance like in an organization? And so that's one characteristic of three that organizations can look at. How would you gauge good performance? In a particular classroom, is a C good performance? Is it a B? Or is the expectation that the members are going to get A's? And that performance orientation, that economic pragmatic orientation, will help to shape the subsequent behaviors that you would see in that particular organization. Some are more ethical or social in nature. And so in those cases, the values are more based on relationships. Things like harmony, things like integrity, character, how do people interact with each other? And so on the one hand, we have economic and pragmatic. Second, we have ethical social, which really relates more to the concept of relationships. And a third is more of this emotional, or what's also called energetic values. And in this case, we're talking about more moral kinds of issues. Things like freedom, creativity, ownership. And so within a given organization, you're going to have different levels of these potentially economic, ethical, and emotional values. And based on those and what the core values are, organizations can actually manage people towards the values themselves. trying to help get buy-in from those values, which those values then lead to the behaviors that the organization would like to see over time. This concludes the first part of our series on organizational culture and change. Thank you very much.